Well, here we are in the archives, the Sisters of Compassion at Island Bay. And I'll just show you, we'll go right back to the French connection, I suppose, over here. And standing in the corner there is St. John Vianney, Cure Aubert. He was the one who inspired her to come out to New Zealand. This is Bishop Redwood, the one who he stood by her. He's about the only bishop that she didn't seem to have a row with. When she was in Rome, she was writing some spiritual reflections in some exercise books. And so she's got them all headed, what she's written in them. This one, for instance, is about justice, equity. And this one's about children, orphans, refugees, pensions. These are the remnants of the medicines that she had done. She adapted French music to and put the Maori words to it. So she was quite a busy lady.
Suzanne Aubert was born in 1835 near Saint-Symphorien-de-Lay in the Loire region, northwest of Lyon. In January 2005, a group of New Zealanders came on a visit to honour her birthplace.
I want to welcome you in the souvenir of Suzanne Aubert, who is born in the house of Saint-Symphorien. We are not sure she is baptized here, but you are really in the place where she is born.
Te whai haere mai ei takahia te motu o Aotearoa. Te noho ki wainga nui te iwi Māori. Te whakako i ngā mātua tūpuna. Te whakatō i te kākano, te whakapono ki roto i te iwi Māori. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Kia ora mai anō rā tātou katoa.
Je ne comprends pas le maori, mais j'ai pu distinguer comme vous quelques mots. C'est des mots pour dire leur joie d'être ici et mentionnant bien sûr le nom de Suzanne Aubert et introduisant sœur Madeleine qui est membre de cette petite congrégation d'une centaine de religieuses exclusivement du Pacifique, néo-zélandaise, fondée par Suzanne Aubert et qui est donc membre de cette congrégation, les Sœurs de la Compassion.
When I was a small baby, I was placed in a home of compassion. This was one of the works that Suzanne Aubert actually ran away from New Zealand back to get permission from the Holy Father to protect the work for children without any parents, illegitimate children.
Monsieur le maire de Saint-Symphorien. Monsieur le maire, voici monsieur le maire. The mayor is the mayor of Saint-Symphorien.
All meet them, you know?
Yes, yeah. Alors, monsieur le député, ce sera la première fois. Mr. Deputy.
How do I get that?
And hopefully, MP. And hopefully he will be in New Zealand.
Maybe.
When Suzanne was 9 years old, the family went to live in the city of Lyon, where her father was a court bailiff. Her parents had planned a suitable marriage for their only daughter, but she wanted instead to nurse, help the disadvantaged, and become a religious sister. Her father refused to allow this. She remembered asking him each year and meanwhile attending courses in medicine and chemistry in the hope that he would relent. These were open to men only, so she sat discreetly behind a screen. At this time, the Lyon region was the epicenter of missionary enthusiasm. Jean-Baptiste Pompallier, also from Lyon, had been the first bishop of Western Oceania since 1836, choosing New Zealand as his base. In 1859, he came back to Lyon to recruit new missionaries. Listeners, packed into Suzanne's parish church of Saint-Nizier, were inspired by his description of his mission to Maori. Suzanne, by then 25 years old, decided to go.
Her parents did not want her to go to the missions, and so she actually had to run away. She used the first anniversary of the death of the Curé d'Ars to make her parents think that she was actually going out to Ars to attend the commemoration out there, whereas in fact she was slipping away to go to Le Havre to join the small band of missionaries that Bishop Pompallier was taking with him to New Zealand.
The little band of recruits boarded a whaling ship for the 4-month trip with no port of call. They detoured down into the southern oceans to hunt whales. The cold was intense, the stench of whale carcasses unbearable. Pompallier introduced Suzanne and her companions to the Maori language and customs he'd been learning for 20 years. On arrival in Auckland, Suzanne and her fellow missionaries found a country in tumult, on the brink of war. New Zealand had been governed by the British since 1840, but the terms of the Treaty of Waitangi between British Crown and Maori chiefs were not always respected. Disputes arose over the treaty's obligation to guarantee to Maori full enjoyment of the natural resources of the country. Bitter warfare broke out. Thousands of imperial soldiers landed in Auckland, which quickly became transformed into a garrison town.
All the beautiful aspect turned very quickly into a certain distress because Suzanne discovered that she was expected to be teaching fine arts, singing, embroidery, French language to the young ladies of this new Pākehā society, whereas she was absolutely determined that she had come out to live with and to be missionary to Maori people. So, cutting a long story short, the 4 French women within a year were in a separate tiny congregation, and they were living with and teaching Maori girls.
Suzanne was now Sister Mary Joseph, Mary Hohepa in Maori. Through most of the 1860s, she was teaching. She would often take her pupils outdoors and use games and music to help them learn. Music was very important to her. She was an excellent pianist and singer. Her educational methods showed understanding and initiative, surprisingly so in an era where harsh discipline kept restless children in check.
Bon, alors c'est chapitre 11 des enfants, ça c'est le titre. Les sœurs aimeront les enfants dont elles sont chargées. Il leur est expressément défendu de les frapper. So she will be saying, the sisters shall love the children. It's not that the sisters shall keep an orphanage. The sisters shall love the children who are in their charge, who are in their care.
Suzanne found a close friend and mentor in Peata, a woman of high rank who became the first Maori religious sister.
She taught Suzanne Maori, she taught Suzanne the protocols of Maori culture. She took Suzanne said that Peata took her around the different marae around Auckland, and that is very important because that meant that Suzanne became used quickly to going out beyond the walls of the convent and to actually meet Maori people in their own milieu.
With Peata, Suzanne would go to Maori Marae, where she would sit with the elders, talking with them and gaining knowledge. She did not want the children she was caring for to be cut off from their culture.
There used to be just two sisters teaching down here at Ranana, but it's quite special to think that Suzanne Aubert was here, and she used
Suzanne already knew how to absorb the dual aspect of people's cultures. And that, I think, is a good thing too, because as New Zealand developed, and as Irish men married Scottish women, and as English men married Maori women, and as we all started to mix and match, she was able to work to always to get the best out of this.
Seven years went by before Pompallier returned to France, leaving behind him a diocese heavily in debt. War had severely affected Auckland's economy. Suzanne managed to keep the institution going for a while with the help of friends and influential people, many of them non-Catholics, who understood the work she was doing. But peace was fragile and trust shaken. Maori had been withdrawing from the missions, back to their tribal areas. A new bishop arrived from Ireland and set about reorganizing the diocese. French missionaries were no longer welcome. The education of Maori no longer a priority. The bishop told Suzanne to go back to France.
She refused. By this time, she had said that she had come to live and work with the Maori, and she was going to do that. And there's a wonderful letter in which she writes this in a type of play dialogue with what the bishop said and what she said. Go back to your people. I will not. I have come here. And you can imagine him with his Irish accent and her with her French accent arguing it out in English.
What do I think of her? Extraordinary woman. Gaining in her strength all the way through that. And as a woman, a French woman in this English-British colony, as a woman living in these incredible pioneer situations in the 19th, early 20th century, it's very hard. Somebody has said the past is a foreign country. What we try to understand today of those people, whether they're Maori, whether they're women or men, French or English, in those circumstances, just a few generations ago, their lives were so different from what we have today.
Suzanne left Auckland, but not New Zealand. She took up an invitation to help at the Marist mission station in Hawke's Bay on the east coast. The French fathers and brothers there, like Suzanne, came from around Lyon. The mission brothers, who'd been in New Zealand since the very early days, were dedicated, brave men, living a simple, frugal life of work and faith. They tended their vines, crops and animals, and were the carpenters and bootmakers keeping the mission station going.
She arrived there and it was like a waft, it was like a breeze of homeliness to her, because she had gone through quite a traumatic time, a hugely traumatic time. The bishop that she loved and worked with had gone back to France in under a sort of a cloud of opprobrium, of disgrace from the financial collapse and the collapse of the bishopric. Her other companions were gone, the girls had gone, and she was ill. And she knew also that back in France her father was very ill. But when she got to Miami, these French men just welcomed her, and we get the sense that this was like home. When she left Auckland, she wasn't actually anymore, strictly speaking, a religious sister, because her congregation had been disestablished. She didn't have a habit on when she lived in Miami. She wore a grey skirt and a straw hat with a veil on it, a sort of odd little costume which was very individual to her, and it was sort of halfway between being what you'd think of as being a nurse's outfit and halfway between being a habit.
At Miani, Suzanne's experience in medicine, nursing, herbal remedies and chemistry was soon in demand.
There was no way that you could keep Suzanne Aubert just busy around the house or resting, because it wasn't long before Father Renier would be writing, saying, "Well, I don't know where Sister Mary Joseph is. She's been going around these roads." She started walking everywhere around the Hawke's Bay flats, around all the Maori communities.
Not only had Maori suffered huge losses in population in the wars, but they were also defenseless against the diseases coming in from the new wave of immigrants. In 1800, there had been over 100,000 Maori. By 1896, their numbers had dropped to 40,000. Many predicted that Maori and their culture would die out.
She was going around with both Pākehā and Maori, bringing her nursing skills. And this is where she becomes Mary, the nurse, Mary, the doctor. And this is where her rongoa suddenly become really widely known. And people would be coming from all around to her red shed at Miani, where she dispensed her medicines.
My grandfather's elder brother became very sick as a baby, and they took him to the doctor. I asked my mother last night, and I think she said Dr. Leahy was his name, and he told the parents there was nothing he could do for the child, that it would die. And of course they were very upset, and they called for Mother Aubert, and she came to the house, and she sat and she, do you understand, stared, regardez fixement, she stared at the baby for about 20 minutes, just looked at the baby and watched him, nothing else. And after that time, she announced to the family, "I believe I know what the problem is." And she diagnosed a tapeworm in the stomach of the baby. She had the correct medicine. She knew how to get rid of the tapeworm. And I know they had very precise times to give the medicine to the baby. I think before the first feed in the morning. And he lived to 79. Her herbal remedies weren't ones that were purchased from somewhere. She found them herself. She discussed with Maori people the remedies that they already used. And they showed her the leaves, the plants, the times of year to gather the various things.
Tui e runga, tui e raro, tui e roto, tui e waho, tui e te hera tangata. Ka runga te pō, ka runga te ao. Tui e te kawai tangata he ki mai o wai ki nui o wai ki roa wai ki pāmamo. I hono ki te wairua ki te whai ao ki te ao marama ti he Māori ora. Ako rangi tuhi a rangi te are me unuku banua
The literal
wuri.
meaning of rongoa is medicine. But for Māori it goes deeper than that. For Māori it goes back to the very beginnings of creation. That everything has a mauri, has a life force. And that we are one and the same with the life force, the mauri.
Mother Aubert held and protected the very medicines of the rongoa of our people. Yeah. And she adapted that with her own knowledge of pharmaceutical stuff. Yeah. And I guess maybe even enhanced some of our rongoas of those times. Yeah. Into making it into cream or ointments and tincture. So maybe in a way she revolutionized rongoa Māori to a certain extent. Yeah. And so she will always hold that special significance amongst our peoples. Yeah.
There were so many settlers flooding into New Zealand in the 1870s. 1874 was the year of the highest immigration into New Zealand, and Hawke's Bay was one of the areas with the greatest number. She grew very upset at this lack of consultation and respect that she saw was happening even among the priests, not necessarily the old priests, but young priests coming in who weren't used to Māori, who couldn't speak Māori, and who were not interested in going out among Māori.
Preparing the way for the long-expected arrival of a new missionary priest, Suzanne worked by night writing a Maori-French manual of grammar and conversation. Then she began a major English-Maori dictionary.
All the previous times in Maori phrase books that had come out, they were purely utilitarian and very patronising, only wanting the phrases which would allow people to be able to buy land or engage Maori labour in making roads. So the phrases were, how much money do you want for this land? Or how much to cut down these trees? Or will you carry these rocks to the ship? Will you carry these spars, these masts, to the ship? And they would only be about 10 or 15 pages long, whereas the book that she wrote was more than 100 pages long. She was preparing a dictionary which had 17,000 entries in it. And they were all of the sorts of areas of life where two people would come together. For example, what to say if you're travelling along the road, and things like, watch out, this path is slippery, take care, this is a very steep path, would you like to share my umbrella? And skipping ropes, and spinning tops, and all of these words which were to do with play and amusements. And she said that it was only the very beginning of what one could do. She apologised that it was so small, and yet it was the biggest book that was ever produced in its time, and there was nothing else like it until midway through the 20th century. So that book went on to be adapted by Maori scholars themselves, hardly changed at all except for the introduction and a little bit about the grammar, and to be used exactly as she had written it right through to 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. So you could say that Suzanne Aubert was very influential in keeping the learning of Maori language alive, as well as her original purpose too of letting Maori people learn English and English people learn Maori.
To win the hearts of Maori people, you have to be tested and proved. Our people, because of society, they've been put down so much that they don't trust easily. You have to win your place there. And she won her place. She won her place through the rongoa and through her knowledge of the te reo and her knowledge of the customs, her respect for the people. And so that has enabled us as a congregation to stand where we stand.
Selfishly speaking, we regard her as ours, but nevertheless, I think that the good influence of Mother Aubert continued well after she had gone.
It was now 1883, and Suzanne had been away from France for 23 years. She would never see her parents again, but in New Zealand, her reputation was growing. When Bishop Redwood wanted to revive Catholic mission to Maori and to reopen a mission station at Jerusalem on the Wanganui River to the west, he called on Suzanne for her invaluable knowledge of Maori language and culture.
We are here at Jerusalem, Hiruharama, on the Wanganui River. This is a sacred spot to the Maori. This is like the heartland of New Zealand for many people. And the river is the most important treasure, taonga, that they have. The water has been their transport, has been their food, has been their guardian, is like their healer. It is everything to them.
In 1883, a Maori canoe carrying unusual passengers paddled up the Wanganui River to Hiruharama, which is called Jerusalem. It brought Mother Mary Aubert and 3 novice sisters, the first Sisters of Compassion of the first religious order founded in New Zealand.
In a few years, Suzanne and the sisters with her built up the mission in this isolated region, far from any centre of population. They brought education and nursing care to more than 2,000 people in settlements scattered in the bush and along the river.
I think she played a great part within our culture, within our people of the river, within this area. I think our people needed, I suppose, another guiding light, I suppose, you know, within the period of the 1880s due to the wars, the land wars, and what actually happened to them during that period. I think at that time she came and helped our people through that hard time.
In a very short time, they built a convent, school and dispensary, as well as a shelter for the disabled. To support the community, Suzanne bought land for a farm and an orchard with money from her own family legacies.
What they did was up in the farm too, they established an orchard, a cherry orchard, something which was so French. A cherry orchard, walnuts, almond trees, pear trees, a whole commercial orchard on the almost vertical slopes.
This is one of the trees that Mother Aubert planted in this whole area. And why it's so significant to us, because it's been here and they used to hold their meetings around this tree and our people talk in front of it, have their marae hui meetings. It's a part of her.
The sisters in Jerusalem rode horses. How else do you get round those steep hills? How else do you get down that riverside along the tracks, either on foot or on horse? Bishop O'Shea didn't like the sisters on horses, but the sisters in Jerusalem carried on riding the horses until around about 1950s.
Make him go, sister. There's the story. I used to be fairly athletic when I was young and so on, but, you know, I was being called to religious life. So, but somebody, at one stage, it was the last thing in the world I wanted. And when somebody asked me, was I going to go to the convent, I said, I'll go if I can join an order that rides horses. And the first thing I saw when I went to Jerusalem were these about 4 saddles on pigs and washhouse.
Soon the sisters had a new problem to face. Mothers of illegitimate children, spurned by society and unable to find work in the years of economic hardship, were increasingly abandoning their babies. Suzanne began to take these children in and to care for them.
And it wasn't long before there were about 40 children from newborns, tiny babies, and in one special case, there was a little baby that was put in a basket at the river steamer that went up, and it just had a ticket, a label with it, with saying, to Mother Aubert, to Mother Mary Joseph at Hiroharama.
As Pompallier was saying from the moment he arrived in New Zealand, I'm not here for one people, I'm here for all people. Suzanne was the same, following on those footsteps, not sticking to one denomination or one race. It is really extraordinary looking at those photographs because those orphans are all the Pākehā children. Māori will never disown their own. Whatever the circumstances of their birth, they're never disowned, they're looked after. The sisters up the river at Jerusalem would know that there were these babies, these orphans on the paddle steamers and arriving, because when they were placed on the paddle steamers down on the wharfs in Whanganui, the messages would be sent up by carrier pigeon. So the pigeons arrive, and you can imagine the sisters, you know, unravelling their little legs, a little message, oh, babies, down to the wharf, welcoming their little babies.
The mother would always have access to the baby. The mother's name went into Suzanne's register, but that was not given to government officials. So the mother never felt cut off from her baby, necessarily. There was always the avenues opened to be able to make contact with her baby later on in her life if she wanted to, or just as soon as she got herself to establish somewhere.
Someone like Mother Aubert, it seemed to me, was someone that did go along that border of, you know, very, very much sort of flirting with disaster and, you know, excommunication, if you like, remaining true to herself, but actually I think in the end remaining true to what's at the heart of, I guess, Christianity.
But at this exact same time, with all these children around them, she was also commercialising her bicultural medicines, her rongoa. The idea, in a way, was a French idea too, the idea of having medicines and to support the work of a congregation, an order. And it was a very good idea because it was immensely successful.
Her herbal remedies sold in their thousands throughout the country. Recommendations came from the governor, the French consul, the archbishop, eminent doctors and chiefs. To meet this extraordinary demand, the pharmaceutical firm managing the commercialization began to dilute the concentrate. Suzanne took them to court, and from then on personally supervised the whole process, including the final bottling and labeling. This meant exhausting work for her and her sisters. Many reasons lie behind Suzanne's decision to stop commercializing her medicines. She alone knew the formulas. She is said to have destroyed any recipes.
When I first studied Suzanne, I didn't know much about her, obviously, but the more I learnt about her, the more impressed I was with her acumen and her abilities. So she was collaborating and developing and researching and using scientific principles that were very impressive. Even today, that is a very rare combination, to have someone who is good at the scientific side and the manufacturing side as well as the business side, and on top of this she had a spiritual dimension. So that sort of combination is very unique. We've been studying Suzanne Aubert's remedies for a number of years, and the main objectives of what we're trying to do is to preserve a lot of the information before it is lost, because the remedies are now over 100 years old. They're certainly breaking down. The second reason is that we want to take this knowledge and return it to the groups that Suzanne Aubert worked with.
Those recipes were passed on to our old people, back to our old people, so that that it sustained them on the river. We have a responsibility to protect that, not only for our own people, but for all nations of the world. Yeah.
Shortly after arriving in Jerusalem, Suzanne and her companions became affiliated to a new congregation of Marist sisters. But by 1892, Archbishop Redwood recognized the distinctive nature of their work and established them as a New Zealand congregation, the Daughters of Our Lady of Compassion. In this way, he gave Suzanne Aubert a greater freedom and sphere of action. She set out the congregation's goals: to work alongside and for everyone, especially Maori and the disadvantaged in life, with no distinction of race or religion. The congregation was placed under the protection of Saint Jean-Marie Vianney in recognition of his important influence on her life. Right up to the 1970s, life in Jerusalem and nearby Ranana revolved to a large extent around the church, school and convent. Since then, education and health have been directly managed by the state.
Mother Aubert, when she came here, she changed her works and her mode of operating because of the needs and government policies or social policies at the time. And we're challenged to do the same. We're challenged to look at our works and to ask, is that the need? Do we need to let that go? And to see what needs are not being met today by other groups or government.
Socially, majority of us all unemployed, and I'd say that we in our community have noticed that we still need that guidance, because most of our old people have gone, and I feel that guidance is given from some of the sisters in our community here. Even for myself, you know, you get that wisdom, and you turn around and there's no one there, but you look at the sisters, they're virtually like a kaumātua of this whole, this area.
our bell rings and nothing happens, but we don't mind that. But that bell is a call to prayer. It doesn't matter whether you come to church or whether you don't come to church. It's a call to prayer. Do you hear it up on the hill?
Yeah, I do, sister.
Yeah. I bet you don't flop down on your knees. We're walking beside you, Ron, so you know very well when that bell goes, we are praying, and we're praying for you.
Oh, thank you very much, sister.
With you.
A lot of people come daily to Jerusalem, particularly from here on in with the good weather. We are mentioned in Lonely Planet guidebooks, so people are curious to see what was here. And some people have heard about this French missionary and want to come and see what happened. So our home here is a home of hospitality. It's to give space and to provide calm and peace.
Rangi Māori tiariki ki a koutou I ngā wā katoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Suzanne would often go down to the capital, Wellington, for business over the medicines or discussions with government departments on behalf of the children in her home. The city was growing rapidly and the fledgling welfare state could not cover everyone's needs. Doctors and priests appealed to Suzanne for help and, in 1899, she came down to Wellington with 2 sisters to work among the poverty-stricken of the city.
When she came down to Wellington in 1899, it was as the new New Zealand Catholic congregation, and Bishop Rebel could say, my sisters are coming down to Wellington. And so when they went around the streets of Wellington, they were the New Zealand sisters.
Starting out with only a half-crown in her pocket, she managed to rent a building and open the first soup kitchen in Wellington. There, the sisters also welcomed and cared for the disabled and incurables, whom no hospital would admit.
The way that she would be able to get help was for her sisters to be known on the streets. So she devised a way whereby she had a sort of a basket, a big collecting basket, which was put onto pram wheels. And her sisters would wheel them through the streets, and especially down to the city markets, the vegetable markets, the food markets, and the noise of these iron-wheeled prams would go clatter, clatter, clatter along the streets. And the sisters also wore hobnail boots, which went clomp, clomp, clank, clank, and the people would hear the sisters coming. But it is true that sometimes the sisters' goffers would be coming forwards because there was always this feeling that they were going around the backs of pubs asking for the men to donate.
At the greengrocer's, the sisters receive fruit and vegetables. The grocer himself carries out a box of provisions for the kitchen. Seeing the sisters' van and knowing of their good work, a passerby spontaneously offers a gift from her own purchases. In addition to those within the home, the sisters have a number of deserving cases on whom they call.
It was interesting, when we had our centenary in 1992, I looked back to 1892 when we started, and it seemed really quite sad that so many of the needs of 1892 was still there in 1992.
Suzanne in the early days had a great way of attracting assistance and getting the community behind her, and that's been partly the reason for the success, I think, and the way that the community is so very much behind both benefactors and donations, financial and food and all sorts of other things, and also in their time. And we never have to advertise for volunteers for the soup kitchen. We just have a steady trickle of people popping in saying, I'd like to be a volunteer.
I think it's good now. I feel that it's a very comfortable environment, and I think everybody gets a lot out of the meal, not just eating the food, but you can see that the people come here to meet and talk and stuff like that, so I quite enjoy it here.
Just learn how to appreciate what other people go through, and you learn kind of how life is for other people, and you're in a kind of sheltered life. I am indeed, and so is he, and we kind of just learn what it's like and how a person could be still happy, and because all these people who come here are still very happy without having all those material possessions. Yeah.
They learn about Suzanne Aubert and about the mission and the values of the place, about the fact that we want it to be a really hospitable place, and we want to really let people know when they come in that we believe they have dignity. A young woman said to me recently, it was great to find out about Suzanne Aubert and the mission, it was really cool. Which was great feedback for us too. Yes.
It's good, eh? Hi, Fred. How are you?
Have a nice meal.
Je suis arrivée il y a 11 jours. J'arrive du Québec, là, de Montréal. Ce que j'aime beaucoup, c'est le contact avec la clientèle ici. J'apprends beaucoup. Ils sont très polis, puis ce qui m'étonne, c'est de voir la qualité, comment les clients du centre Compassion Center sont privilégiés. Ils sont traités aux petits oignons. Les chefs ici, dans la cuisine, font une cuisine extraordinaire. La clientèle ici se sent aimée, se sent beaucoup aimée. Puis je pense que c'est pour ça, c'est pour cette raison-là qu'ils sont si polis puis si contents de rentrer ici, parce qu'ils savent qu'ils ne seront pas jugés. Ils sont acceptés comme ils sont, et puis ils sont contents le temps qu'ils sont ici. Puis comme j'ai dit tantôt, ils manquent pas de nourriture, ils manquent pas de soins. Puis il y a toujours quelqu'un pour les écouter. Si quelqu'un a quelque chose à dire, a le cœur gros, il y a toujours quelqu'un ici.
So you know how she comes through as feisty, strong, politically very shrewd, but essentially a woman of faith and compassion who was close to people who were in need, really felt their suffering, warm-hearted, and yet could be quite uncompromising.
It was about 100 years ahead of her time, and we're just catching up.
One of the most moving aspects of the sisters' work is their care of the incurable patients, born with lifelong infirmities. The sisters instruct them with skilled patience and devotion that wins results.
Yeah, that's better.
One of the key things that we try to do is to use the artwork for the benefits of the artists who make them, and use it as a tool. We recognize it as a tool of communication, as a tool that might help them derive income from their work in one way or another, as a tool of integration. When we had our opening exhibition a couple of weeks ago, it was mind-blowing. I was much better than I dared to hope that the people who came, first of all, lots of people came. We must have had 150, 200 people here. And we had to throw them out. They just didn't want to leave.
By the time 1905 and the mid-years of the first decade were coming around, she had decided that she really wanted a place which could be both a hospital and a large institute where she could once again start taking in babies and very young children. They laid the foundation stone, and gradually they started to raise money for that. It was amazing how much money the people of Wellington and the hinterland of where she was known contributed towards this building. In fact, the Bishop of Auckland at the time wrote to her and said, "Give me your recipe for success."
The 15th of April 1907 saw the opening of a large and impressive building standing out against the bare hillside at Island Bay. In a burst of goodwill and solidarity, hundreds of people, prominent figures, soldiers, shopkeepers, students, labourers, men, women and children, came together to work for Mother Aubert. They spent their days off carting up material and creating access for a water reservoir. The home of compassion, covering more than 10,000 square metres, was now there to welcome the needy without consideration of race or religion.
Suzanne Aubert, one of her main thrusts was to be undenominational. So the thing was that we gave our services free, sisters never charged, and we ran our big hospitals and everything else, and we never charged. So it was for the poor, and it was undenominational. As a matter of fact, it was so... I personally got this idea from my training that this undenominational aspect was emphasised so much that when I was in a situation of admitting people to a residential, I seemed to go to people who were not Catholic.
Problems arose. Many in the local church hierarchy objected to the sisters' huge workload, the public presence, the openness of relations with other creeds, and the protection of mothers whose babies they considered to be the fruit of sin. They also wanted more control over Suzanne's properties and their use.
Two bishops, Bishop Cleary of Auckland and Archbishop O'Shea, the coadjutor archbishop, disliked the way that her work was going, considered that she worked her sisters too hard and wanted to curtail an awful lot of the activities, especially her very pioneer work up in the home place in Jerusalem. This was absolutely impossible to Suzanne Aubert. Her very vision, her very spirituality was at stake. And she had to, in a sense, run away once again to Rome.
By now, Suzanne was 79 years old. In August 1913, she set off on the long voyage to Rome in order to obtain recognition for the Sisters of Compassion as an independent congregation under papal authority.
And she was blocked in Rome by the fact of World War I, by the fact that she had no passport to come back, and by the fact of waiting for this decree of praise. Finally, despite the fact that her congregation was small, that it didn't have the requisite number of sisters, that it did not have the approval of both dioceses, the Pope gave her congregation their decree of praise, and they became a separate congregation. And the decree by which they were able to practice their works was an extremely wide-ranging one which gave them enormous amount of liberty in whatever works they wanted to do.
She'd attack kings or leaders or government people or mayors or anybody if she thought that they were not giving the poor what they needed.
After 6 long years away, she came back to Wellington and was glad to see how the sisters had kept everything running successfully in her absence, continuing to follow her teaching and vision. Her body was weak now, but she kept her mind alert and busy to the last. It was as if she could not allow herself to leave until she had arranged in the finest detail the stability and future of the congregation. Suzanne died on the 1st of October 1926, aged 91. She is buried on the hillside at Island Bay in Wellington.
The day of her funeral, it was a bright, clear day, and as she went down in the procession going down to St. Mary of the Angels, which was a beautiful new church at the time, the streets gradually became fuller and fuller of people. And when she arrived at the church and her coffin was carried up, in the church there were all government officers, there were doctors, there was members of Parliament, the mayor, the whole of Wellington, in a sense, as many people as possibly could, had come to the funeral of Suzanne Aubert.
I think it gives an indication of her place in New Zealand history, that her funeral was so well attended. This lady had become almost a legendary figure in her own lifetime.
Actually, one thing I remember being quite funny when we were living in France 3 years ago, we were getting sugar in the cafe, and they have those little pieces of paper that wrap up sugar with heads of famous French women on them. I don't know if you've ever seen these. They're like little on the paper wrappers, and we'd always unwrap them, going, "Where's Mother Aubert?" We're just waiting for the day that we would unwrap a sugar cube in France, and it would have Mother Aubert on it. So I think when that's happened, we'll know that she's been recognised and given her, due, and back in La France.
She wasn't out to impress people or to make friends. She just simply wanted to make people's lives better, and that's why she was something like a prophet. She was able to speak out, and it didn't matter if she offended the bishops or whoever it was, because she knew she had a task to do. So we were very happy to support the cause for canonisation, and I have told the sisters that any time I go to Rome, I will continue to visit the congregation to tell them to hurry it up.
When a long time ago, and I've been in the convent now for well over 60 years, and I used to think, why should we pray for Suzanne Aubert when she's already in heaven? If she's not in heaven, well, nobody is, so why should we be praying for her all the time? And I was a bit half-hearted about that. But now I know, for our iwi, it is so important.
All right, now we'll go into the strong room, and I'll just show you where everything's kept. It's a very hard door since they put the carpet on the floor. Whether or not she becomes canonised or not is beside the point. We know she's a holy woman, and we know that a lot of people, Catholic and non-Catholic, honour her as a very holy woman. In fact, the Church of England, the Anglican Communion, have got her in their common book of prayer, in their calendar of holy people. So they're a step ahead of the Catholics. I think she's still really present today, and I think it's very significant, all the different things that are happening here at Island Bay, at Tory Street, all the different kinds of people who are being helped and aided in their different works of charity that she would have done in her day. But we, the sisters, because we're so few, can't do the hands-on anymore, but we can support them in other ways.
The sisters are involved in Caritas International, and that is going worldwide. They are involved in so many areas of work within the city, within the country, and they are probably too modest to be able to recognise that they are actually embodying within themselves the entire